Look at modern sports for a second. Football, basketball, tennis, golf. Every single one of them has something in common. Rules, referees, safety equipment, and a general understanding that the objective is not supposed to be murder. If somebody dies during a modern sporting event, that becomes international news. There are investigations, lawsuits, documentaries. People lose their jobs. Medieval people looked at this concept and basically said, skill issue. Because if you traveled back to medieval Europe and asked, what do you people do for fun? The answers would include punching your neighbors, throwing rocks at each other, fighting bulls, launching yourself off horses with giant sticks, and occasionally participating in sporting events so violent that entire towns ended up looking like they had just survived a military invasion. This wasn't considered crazy, this was considered recreation, and somehow they get progressively worse, because the peasants start with organized chaos. The nobles turn it into professional chaos, and eventually someone decides the best sporting event is basically war. So let's begin with the common people, the only group in human history capable of looking at a perfectly good ball and somehow turning it into a public safety emergency. Imagine you're a medieval peasant. Life already sucks. You wake up before sunrise, your back hurts, your teeth hurt, your knees hurt. You're probably carrying 3 different diseases right now. Your diet consists mainly of bread and optimism. And then finally, after weeks of work, it's festival day. Time to relax, time to unwind, time to enjoy some friendly competition. So naturally, your village gathers hundreds of grown men together and starts what historians politely call medieval football. Now, when you hear football, you might imagine a soccer field, goalposts, teams, uniforms, a referee, a whistle. Forget all of that. Medieval football had approximately one rule: get the ball over there. That's it. Everything else was negotiable. The field could be an entire town. The goal might be 2 churches located miles apart. The teams might contain hundreds of players. Sometimes entire villages competed against neighboring villages. Imagine Manchester United versus Liverpool. Now replace the players with angry farmers. Replace the stadium with an entire county. And remove every rule that prevents criminal assault. That gets you surprisingly close. The match begins, somebody throws the ball, and immediately all order collapses. Men sprint through streets. People crash into market stalls. Windows shatter. Fences disappear. Chickens achieve flight. Nobody knows where the ball is. Half the players don't know which team they're on. The objective slowly evolves from move the ball to beat the other village into submission. Records from medieval England repeatedly describe injuries, broken bones, concussions, lost teeth, and in some cases, deaths. People literally drowned while chasing the ball through rivers. Others were trampled, some were crushed by crowds, and everyone apparently looked at this and thought, fantastic game today. Modern football fans celebrate a good tackle. Medieval football fans accidentally started local disasters, and it became such a problem that kings repeatedly tried banning it. Not because it was too violent, because people enjoyed it so much they stopped practicing archery. Think about how insane that is. The government wasn't saying this sport is dangerous. The government was saying please stop breaking each other's ribs and go practice for actual war. And even that didn't work. People kept playing anyway. Because apparently if you're a medieval peasant and your life expectancy is already questionable, getting flattened by 30 neighbors is simply another risk you're willing to take. But somehow, this wasn't the most dangerous thing peasants did for entertainment. Not even close. Every culture invents wrestling, every single one. Because apparently the moment humans become self-aware, somebody immediately says, I bet I can throw you. Medieval Europe was no exception. Wrestling tournaments happened everywhere. Villages, fairs, markets, festivals, anywhere people gathered. And unlike football, wrestling actually had rules, which sounds encouraging. Until you learn what those rules were, the goal wasn't points. The goal wasn't style. The goal was putting another human being into the ground hard enough that everyone agreed you won. Imagine spending all week harvesting crops, then using your only day off to get suplexed by a blacksmith named Hans. A blacksmith who weighs approximately the same as a horse. A blacksmith who thinks pain is a personality trait. A blacksmith who has been waiting all month for an excuse to body slam somebody. That's medieval wrestling. And people loved it, because unlike modern sports, where spectators sit politely in designated areas, medieval spectators treated sporting events like interactive experiences. They yelled, they bet money, they argued, they occasionally joined fights themselves, which meant wrestling matches could rapidly evolve into crowd fights, then village fights, then everyone fighting everyone, which is an impressive achievement for a sport that starts with only 2 participants. But medieval people weren't satisfied with punching each other. Eventually, somebody had a better idea. And by better, I mean significantly worse. What if we started throwing rocks? Because yes, people genuinely turned throwing rocks into a competitive activity. And before you say, well, surely there were safety precautions, no, this is medieval Europe. The safety precaution was not standing where the rock was going. That was the entire system. At fairs and festivals, young men would compete to see who could throw stones the farthest. Sounds harmless. Until you realize these weren't little pebbles. These were giant chunks of rock specifically chosen because they were difficult to throw. The medieval equivalent of walking into a gym and deciding the dumbbells weren't dangerous enough. The strongest competitors became local celebrities. Entire crowds gathered to watch. Bets were placed. Arguments started. Egos inflated. And because humans have never changed, somebody always tried lifting a stone far heavier than they could handle, which usually ended exactly how you'd expect. One moment they were attempting greatness, the next moment they were discovering gravity's opinion on the matter. But compared to what came next, rock throwing was practically chess, because eventually medieval governments got involved. And whenever governments get involved in sports, things become significantly weirder. If you lived in medieval England, there was one sport the government desperately wanted you to play. Not football, not wrestling, not stone throwing, archery. Every Sunday, every holiday, every free afternoon, archery. Because kings weren't stupid. They noticed something. Every few decades, another war showed up, and wars required archers. Lots of archers. So instead of maintaining a massive standing army, they basically turned the entire male population into part-time military equipment. Imagine your government announcing, "Congratulations, citizens, your new hobby is now mandatory." That's essentially what happened. Laws were passed requiring men to practice archery. Practice wasn't optional. Skipping practice could result in fines. Think about how insane that sounds. Modern governments encourage exercise. Medieval governments legally required you to become good at launching sharp sticks through people, and it worked terrifyingly well. English longbowmen became famous throughout Europe. These weren't normal bows. These things were monsters. Some required over 100 pounds of draw weight. Modern gym-goers would struggle to pull them. Medieval archers trained so much that historians can actually identify skeletons belonging to longbowmen. Their bones literally changed shape. Imagine exercising so hard your skeleton starts adapting. That's not a hobby anymore. That's biological remodeling. But the best part? People actually enjoyed the competitions. Villages held contests. Prizes were awarded. Crowds gathered. Bragging rights were earned. For one glorious afternoon, your entire social status depended on whether you could accurately fire a stick. Which honestly isn't that different from modern golf, just significantly deadlier. And yet, despite all this effort, despite all these laws, despite literally reshaping their skeletons, the average medieval peasant still preferred football. Because deep down, humans don't want discipline. Humans want chaos. And nobody understood that better than medieval crowds. Which brings us to the moment sports stopped being games and started becoming public riots. Modern sporting events occasionally get rowdy. Fans argue, fans shout. Sometimes fans fight. Medieval spectators looked at that and treated it as a minimum requirement. Because medieval crowds had absolutely no chill. Imagine thousands of people gathering in one place. Add alcohol, add gambling, add local rivalries, add centuries of unresolved grudges. Then place everyone around a violent sporting event. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. The answer is everything. Football matches frequently ended in mass fights. Not between players, between spectators. Entire neighborhoods got involved. People who weren't even watching sometimes got dragged into the chaos. Imagine sitting peacefully inside your house. Suddenly a mob crashes through your front door chasing a ball. You have no idea what's happening. Nobody explains anything. And somehow you're now participating in medieval sports, against your will. Records describe property damage, street fights, broken windows, destroyed fences, and general mayhem. At one point, authorities became so frustrated they repeatedly attempted to ban certain games entirely, which only made people want to play them more. Because humans have a special talent for turning bad ideas into traditions. The more authorities complained, the more people played. The more people played, the more injuries occurred. The more injuries occurred, the more stories got told. And before long, every village had legends. Stories about impossible victories, insane tackles, broken bones, and that one idiot who tried something spectacular and immediately regretted it. Which brings us to a fascinating realization. Peasants were doing all this without armor, without weapons, without horses. Just imagine what happened when rich people got involved. Because if peasants created chaos with a ball, nobles decided the logical next step was charging at each other with giant wooden spears, and somehow they convinced themselves this was entertainment. Imagine you're a medieval noble. You're rich. You own land. You have servants. You have status. You have opportunities most people can only dream about. So naturally, you decide to climb onto a horse and sprint directly toward another heavily armed man, at full speed, while both of you are carrying giant lances. Welcome to jousting, the sport that answered the question, what if we turned a car crash into a tournament? And the craziest part? People absolutely loved it. To medieval nobles, jousting wasn't just a sport. It was the sport. The Super Bowl, the World Cup, the Olympics. The biggest stars weren't singers. They weren't actors. They weren't influencers. They were knights who were exceptionally good at hitting other knights with sticks. Crowds traveled huge distances to watch. Kings attended, queens attended, massive amounts of money changed hands. Entire careers were built around it, and every single event started with the possibility that someone might die, which admittedly does increase audience engagement.